Here at the Prosecution Channel, we believe strongly in a traditional American Christmas. If you support Christmas, smash that like button and subscribe to this channel. Thanks. In the mid-20th century, we saw the clash of the three big political ideologies: liberalism, communism, and fascism. Liberalism is the only one that survives today. The other ideologies are considered discredited at this point. People associate fascism and communism with atrocities. However, history is written by the victors. Is liberalism truly innocent? Is it possible we're also the baddies? I'm skeptical. That being said, I was asked to respond to this video about the death toll of capitalism. Each of the big three has their own economic system. Liberalism as capitalism, communism as socialism, and fascism as a fusion of the former two. Now, I've argued in the past that liberalism can be just as deadly as communism or fascism. Specifically, I've cited to the massive deaths that have occurred over decades in Mexico and the US related to drug addiction and drug trafficking. However, I think it would be fair to point out that that issue has more to do with liberal trade policy than with capitalism itself. So let's address the idea that capitalism has killed millions of people.
Why do people play the numbers game? It's dehumanizing and doesn't hold very well as an argument on its own. Stripped of its nuance, it's simply a number, to be regurgitated as an attempt to stop a conversation before it even begins. However, it's something we have to deal with. In my personal experience, one of, if not the most frequent objection to socialism that I've heard is, "Socialism killed 100 million people in the last century." It's uttered almost reflexively, as if it isn't a thought that one came up with on their own, but one that is almost taught to be shot back at a moment's notice. The figure comes from a work, notorious in its unreliability, called The Black Book of Communism.
That's simply not true. There have been multiple scholars who have attributed millions of deaths to communist dictators. The idea that this is all a result of a single book is ridiculously false.
Now, we can go through each instance mentioned in the book and provide the nuance necessary to not only explain the number, but also arrive at a correct figure, be it higher or lower, usually much, much lower, than mentioned in the book. There might be some merit to that. Better yet, why don't we turn the argument on its head? How about capitalism's death toll? First of all, we need to define our terms. What exactly makes the system we currently live under capitalism? Well, it's simple. Unlike the propagandizing sophistry of some economists and other types, capitalism can be clearly defined by the existence of 1. Markets, 2. The private ownership of the means of production, and 3. Wage labor.
Look, you don't need to explain capitalism. I know this might come as a shock, but chances are if someone clicked on a video called "The Real Death Toll of Capitalism," that person probably knows what capitalism is. Defining capitalism is something you'd only want to do if your audience was middle school kids.
Before some guy in a fedora tries to correct me, I'm talking about the scientific definition of these concepts, not the colloquial terms. Capitalism is a global system, and as a result, these factors exist, with few exceptions, globally. How does capitalism function? Primarily on one single concept, the drive for profit, the profit motive. For a capitalist to be successful, he has to beat out his competition by the most ruthless methods in order to secure as high a profit as possible to further develop their business. Kind-heartedness won't get you anywhere in this game. What this means, in essence, is that if it doesn't make you money, it isn't worth doing. Providing safe drinking water? No point. Vaccinations? A money pit. Housing? Why bother?
What are you talking about? We have safe drinking water. Vaccines? Yeah, we have them. Housing is another thing that we have. So what are you talking about? How does anything you're saying here make any sense at all? Let me tell you, it doesn't.
Privatizing water sources, kicking poor people out of cheap housing to build luxury condos, defunding healthcare, now that's profitable. This directly results in millions dying across the planet every year as a direct result of capitalist policies. Malnutrition kills over 3 million children each year. Factor in as thousands every single day.
We have an obesity crisis in the West. In fact, that would be a much better argument you could make against capitalism. Malnutrition is a much bigger problem in communist countries. I mean, they're eating rats and dogs in Venezuela. People in the US and Europe don't have to resort to eating rats and dogs, nor do they eat beloved racehorses.
This isn't because we don't produce enough food, we do. In fact, we produce far more than we currently need, even when we factor in the massive waste of food that occurs in highly industrialized countries, again, as a direct result of capitalist policies. It isn't even because we don't have the distribution systems, we have that too. And for the places that lack it, it could very quickly be developed. Just look at how quickly mining and fuel companies get to the deepest and most isolated parts of our Earth for that which will make them money. The reasons that thousands of children die each and every single day is because it isn't profitable to save them, to treat them, to house them, to feed them.
Notice how he's not comparing capitalists to communist countries. You can't just point to problems that exist in a society and then say they're caused by capitalism. You actually need evidence in order to say that.
Similarly, and equally sad, is the situation with drinking water. Over 1 million people die each year because of lack of access to clean drinking water.
Unsafe water is responsible for 1.2 million deaths a year. Okay, where? How do I know that any of this has anything to do with capitalism? I don't, and the reason is, this video is terrible.
Not only in Yemen or Mozambique, but even in the richest country on earth, the ever-free United States of America. Again, not because we can't provide clean drinking water, but because it isn't profitable to do so. The situation with preventable illnesses is equally dismal. Tuberculosis causes 1.5 million deaths yearly, pneumonia kills 4 million, malaria kills 500,000. This isn't mentioning other common illnesses like hepatitis or other vaccine-preventable diseases. We're talking easily over 6 million deaths each year because it's more profitable to invest and distribute acne and foot fungus cream than it is to provide vaccines and antibiotics to those that don't have much capacity to pay for it.
You're talking about the entire world. The world isn't entirely capitalist. If third world capitalist countries fail to provide vaccines to people, that's not evidence against capitalism. To fairly argue this point, you have to compare third world communist countries to third world capitalist countries. Otherwise, you're just holding capitalism to an impossible standard. You're saying that if capitalism doesn't immediately rise a third world country out of poverty, then all deaths caused by poverty in that country are attributable to capitalism. That's not a fair argument.
Being conservative, that's 10 million excess deaths as a result of capitalism each year.
You haven't proven these deaths are a result of capitalism. More likely, they just result from poverty. Capitalism isn't magic. If you're in an impoverished country, you can't just adopt capitalism and rid yourself of poverty. The fact that capitalism isn't the automatic solution to all problems doesn't make it the cause of those problems. You've offered zero evidence that socialism would avoid the problems of poverty. A small portion of countries have managed to lift themselves out of poverty through capitalism. No country has ever lifted itself out of poverty through socialism.
That figure is actually low, in fact, as I'm not factoring in imperialist wars, intentional destabilization of governments due to either the lobbying or the direct intervention of corporations, or governments especially friendly to corporations, IMF restructuring of governments, and predatory loaning forcing austerity on populations worldwide, and on and on.
Okay, those all sound more promising than anything you've said so far in the video. Arguing that capitalism has a huge death toll due to malnutrition is just obviously stupid and flawed. It bewilders me why you would make that the centerpiece argument of this video.
Capitalism requires new markets. Capitalism results in winners in the competitive sphere, resulting in monopolies. Capitalism results in capitalists acting in their own interests, lobbying governments to put in legislation that favors them directly. It's good for business to keep third world countries underdeveloped, or overexploited, as this is a more accurate term.
Do capitalists exploit third world countries? You bet. Do they pursue a race to the bottom? Absolutely. Is communism a solution to these problems? No. Again, what country became communist and then lifted itself out of poverty? The answer is none.
That way you can keep extracting resources cheaply, and exploiting the labor also equally cheaply. It's good for business to suppress workers' movements, that way you can keep wages low and working hours long. It's good for business to care for profit over need. Not only is it good, it's necessary. This all results in the stagnation of wages at the very least, as is the case in the US today,
Well, your chart conveniently begins in 1964. If we went back prior to that, you'd see US workers' wages did in fact climb up. The US wasn't any less capitalist back then. Is it possible some other event happened in 1964 that could explain stagnation of wages? Like an immigration bill that massively reshaped the demographics of the US? A bill that's brought 70 plus million third world laborers into the country since it was passed? Leftists don't like to acknowledge immigration as a cause of stagnant wages. That's because they care more about their ideology than the truth.
Or the forced depression of wages to as low as they can get, as is the case worldwide.
Capitalism can rightly be criticized for creating a race to the bottom. Let's say I want to manufacture tires. I'm likely to pick whatever factory can deliver me the tires at the lowest price. A factory that pays its workers next to nothing to work in unsafe conditions will get awarded the job. So is embracing socialism a solution to this problem? Not really. China is a communist country. Yet it is the epicenter of the race to the bottom economics. China is notorious for treating its workers as expendable and subjecting them to dangerous, environmentally unsafe workplaces. So how can this problem actually be addressed? Well, why not regulate the marketplace to avoid a race to the bottom? It's within the power of a country like the US to limit the ability to offshore manufacturing. That would compel firms to employ American workers at factories that comply with American labor and environmental regulations.
This results in neocolonialism in the guise of the IMF or different countries like France or the US, political destabilization for capitalist gain in poor third world countries, with the United Fruit Company being the prime example, or even outright military invasion in the cases of Iraq and Afghanistan, to name just a few. The cases are endless. All of these things happen in order to secure resources, secure markets, and secure quote-unquote friendly governments that will give preferential treatment to the Exxons, Nestle's, and Teslas of the world. If you uphold capitalism, you must logically also uphold all that capitalism requires to function, be it unemployment, imperialism, environmental destruction, inequality, and exploitation. All of this results in poverty, the degradation of infrastructure, and limitations on the access of education, housing, and healthcare.
Housing, education, and healthcare didn't used to be expensive in America. They only became expensive when the value of labor relative to other goods was reduced. This was driven by two forces. The first is the offshoring of so much of America's manufacturing to third world countries. The second is the massive importation of laborers from the third world. When labor is cheap and abundant, it loses its value. That makes it harder for workers to purchase things like healthcare, education, and housing.
The cruel joke is that the system needs this. It is an inbuilt feature, not a fluke. Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, it doesn't matter. It still happens and will continue to happen unless the system is dismantled.
When Donald Trump instituted policies restricting immigration, workers experienced their first real wage increases in decades. Prior to this nonsense pandemic, America experienced its greatest economy of all time. So yeah, socialism isn't a solution. If anything, socialism is a distraction from what in fact is the actual issue.
This takes me to another point. Everything you hear about socialism, more or less, is capitalist projection. Workers work in monotonous, lifeless housing. They work dead-end jobs where they have no control over their workplaces. They live in a dictatorship where they have no political say and a distant group of elites run everything. Socialism killed millions.
I agree 100% with everything you said. That includes communists being responsible for the deaths of millions. Capitalism sucks. The issue is that you can't prove that it sucks more than socialism. You can't prove it because it just isn't true.
Not only is it projection, but those that promote capitalism, when confronted with this information, will try to shift responsibility by every other excuse: corruption, corporatism, bad management, etc. Individual action rather than the system itself. Damned be the evidence. What of the Black Book of Communism, then? The number of 100 million can realistically be traced only to this academic work, and I use those words loosely.
Yeah, a single book is responsible for believing this. What a joke.
To quote Chomsky, supposing we now apply the methodology of the Black Book to India, that democratic capitalist experiment has caused more deaths than in the entire history of communism everywhere since 1917. Over 100 million deaths by 1979, and tens of millions more since, in India alone.
The early 30s in Germany, the Communist Party, following the Stalinist line at the time, took the position that everybody but us is a social fascist. So there's no difference between the Social Democrats and the Nazis. So therefore, we're not going to join with the Social Democrats to stop the Nazi plague. But we know where that led. Okay, there are many other cases like that, and I think we're seeing a rerun of it. So let's take the position, never Biden. I'm not going to vote for Biden. There is such a thing. There's a thing called arithmetic. We can debate a lot of things, but not arithmetic. Failure to vote for Biden in this election in a swing state amounts to voting for Trump. Takes one vote away from the opposition, same as adding one vote to Trump. So if you decide you want to vote for the destruction of organized human life on Earth, for the sharp increase in threat of nuclear war,
Pity, because the victims of capitalism continue to do so. And that's all for this time. If you enjoy my videos, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help.
Okay, capitalism kills millions of people. Yet here I'm gonna list all of the people who gave me money to make this garbage video. Can you imagine paying someone to make a rant about how capitalism is evil? How stupid are you people? Are you all gonna go out and purchase plane tickets to fly out to watch a rock concert about stopping global warming?
I'd like to thank my patrons, so thank you to Joseph Nicholson, Morgan Amol, Violet XD, Daniel Hyman, Zero Adams, Andrea CC97, ASDF, FDSA, Anses3, Zach, Zachary L. Petrovsky, D-Lop, Vegan Comrade, Ramal Bedier, Caleb Reeves, Oren Vongdi, Ides of Marx, Biblaridian Fan, Abdullah Thutp, Gonzalo Lud, Cash Nelson, Preston Mains, Set, Sam Korth, Rima, Big Dummy Jack, Huge Ass, Princess Charlotte, William Hargis, Alex Dexheimer, Comrade Saul, Anarcho-Marxist, Richard Scott Wigton, Lee Gloucester, JC Diaz 547, Faisal Hussein, Ryan Hodgkinson, Samir Sarkar, Annex Magnus, Patrick Mansouri, Philip Corrales, Jenny Enox, Comrade R, Alexander Shendi, Wild Bill, Brandon Vergara, A Comrade, At Southern Marxist, Close Sniper, Colin Morgan, Because Butts, Alex Bookbinder, Alex Benishek, Comrade Goat, D. Lang, Darius A. Birdhall, John Bernstein, John Poland, Noel, Nobody, Paul Luders, Pauline McDeasy, Rocco, Rose Hogginson, Scott Radburn, Alan Plum, Brandon Persuade, Coach Cinnamon T, Comrade Benito, Comrade Pengu, Dal McFarlane, L.A. Garzon, Eugene Simonovsky, Ferratahan, Garlic Bread, Grammar Antifa, Granola Joe, Industrial Robot, Wes, Chongja Hu, DV Gold Gamer, Phyllis Stakes, Job, Spooky Scary Socialist, Jordan Follows, Khan, Kyle Rapp, Liam Sapanen, Libertarian Stalinist, Mass Strike Now, Matt, Michael Reddy Webster, Namratha Prabhu, Natalie Taylor, Omar Abdi Jabbar, Parker Cushing, Ring, Rudy, Sid Singh, Sussy M, Ted Teddington Tedsville, Toki Mukai, Tristan Drian, Veraldor, Zatarani, and Zaran Arson.
Wow, that's an awful lot of capitalist supporters you have. Seems like the system works quite well for you. I see the first thing in your video description is your Patreon. Must be real nice to get $800 to make videos like, is Aladdin racist? So in conclusion, does capitalism have a huge death toll? Well, all I know is this video didn't even come close to proving anything. Anything other than the person who made it's a moron. Anyways, if you support Christmas, support this small YouTube channel by subscribing. Thanks.